We gather this hour as people of faith, having sorrows and joys and needs and gifts. We light this beacon of hope as a sign of our quest for truth and meaning and in celebration of the life we share together.
My name is Jay Kiskell, and I'm a member of the Universalist Convocation Executive Committee. And the Universalist Convocation sponsors these monthly Vesper services to bring interesting conversation. And Mark, again, I'm thanking you in advance for attending this evening and being our speaker. But mostly it's also to allow people who have a heart for universalism to have a place of fellowship where they can come and share. And this is a very unique space. I will do one bit of advertising, actually two. We have another Vespers in April, which will be presented by Craig Morrow, who is on but not on camera. And in May, we will have our in-person convocation. Helen, do you remember the dates for that? That's May 15th through the 17th. She'll check, but we'll make sure you
Yes,
get those.
that's correct. Friday night through Sunday after the service.
And you can go to universalistconvocation.org for more information. It's being held in Newberry, South Carolina. The theme is Southern Universalism, and it is really the heart of Southern Universalism starts right in Newberry in that surrounding area. And we will have a video presentation by one of our dear friends and a true Universalist circuit rider, the Reverend Rhett Baird, who will be unable to travel, but we will have him on video. So I invite all who can to attend, because this will be our last in-person Universalist Convocation, which started in 1990. So I hope people may find the time to attend that session accordingly. What I'd like to do now is introduce the Reverend Mark Harris, who is our speaker this evening. And Mark is a retired UU minister who has served 3 congregations in Massachusetts and was the director of information for the UUA. He's also taught UU history and polity at several universities. He now lives retired with his wife, Andrea, in Lowell, Massachusetts. Mark is also an author of several books, one, Elite, Uncovering Classism in Unitarian Universalist History, the A to Z of Unitarian Universalism. I think that's a 2-volume set too, Mark, if I'm not mistaken, which is excellent. And he also has a book that he has written with his wife, the Reverend Andrea, and why did I just, Andrea Greenwood, Introduction to Unitarian and Universalist Traditions. And Mark also spoke earlier, years ago, at our Universalist Convocation in Florida. It is quite an honor to have you here tonight, Mark. And he will give his talk. And afterwards, we invite everyone into conversation and comment. So, Mark, I'm going to hand it off to you. And if you need any assistance, just ask and we will come to your assistance.
Great. Thanks so much, Jay. It's good to be with you all. Thank you for inviting me. A couple of things before I begin. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Justin Lapointe, who I didn't notice was here at first. Justin and I graduated from the same high school in Orange, Massachusetts, where his father was minister at the Universalist Church. It's the church where I was dedicated as a child, but he was in the same class as my brother Gary. And then Justin and I went on to serve the same church, Universalist Church in Palmer, Massachusetts. He was there just prior to my ministry there. It was the first church that I served. I think it was his first church as well. Anyways, I'm glad Justin's with us. Great to see him.
So, Mark, a bit of a technical thing. It looks like you're having some bandwidth issues. I'm going to ask people to turn their cameras off while Mark is speaking, and maybe we'll get some more bandwidth for Mark's presentation. Go ahead, Mark.
All right. Am I freezing a little bit?
You're a bit blurred, but we hope you'll be cleared up with when we take away the other videos that are on. So please continue.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Second thing I wanted to say was that this talk tonight is partly sermon, partly lecture. Some of it's based on a talk I gave at the General Assembly in 2005, which was on the 200th anniversary of the publication of a treatise on atonement by Hosea Ballou. And so that forms a substantial part of my talk tonight, which is fairly long. So settle in and hopefully enjoy yourselves. We begin with these words from Barbara Kingsolver. I struggle to forgive the unforgivable and doubt I am up to the task. Sometimes I've survived anger only 1 minute at a time by saying to myself again and again that the best revenge is some kind of life beyond this, some kind of goodness. And I can lay no claim to goodness until I can prove that mean people have not made me mean. Let me begin with a story which is a recent revelation in my life and an important revelation. I'm a part-time administrator for a charitable fund which provides grants to retired ministers in need. Not long ago, I received an email from a lawyer who was researching an investment scheme that financially enriched more than 60 charitable groups in Boston. In the 1820s and 1830s, specialized banks were chartered in the southern United States for the purpose of making loans to plantation owners. The loans were secured by what were called slave mortgages, formed on the backs of the enslaved persons who were pledged as collateral, and then banks issued bonds which were purchased by investors in Boston. These loans began yielding financial benefit to the 60 nonprofits within 2 years. This benefit included my own fund. This news had a profound effect on me as I began to ruminate that all of our Massachusetts Congregational Charitable Society wealth is the enduring legacy of slavery, earned on the backs of human beings we called property to buy and sell, to use and abuse in any manner we chose. What to do with this kind of information? What is my responsibility? Should we work to find the names of all those people who were enslaved in connection with this scheme and eventually support reparations for them? Should we make a donation to help fund the work that lays bare the truth about our history? Even still, the purpose of my organization is to help clergy who have severe financial needs. What if those funds were not available to help them? In fact, I wonder, where do the UUA invested funds originate? I'm afraid we are all culpable. What the lawyer's research has uncovered, and there is little reason to doubt its veracity, is terrible indeed. We need look no further to see the roots of white supremacy. It's painful to read, a devastating indictment of what our forebears did in Jesus' name, in our name. I see it in the books that line my shelves that I have read over the past few years. The Half That's Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of Capitalism, Caste, and currently Sugar in the Blood, which tells the story of the author's ancestor whose plantation helped fuel the sugar industry in Barbados, echoing a recent experience of mine when Andrea and I spent 2 weeks on St. John in the Virgin Islands, preaching for our UU fellowship there, while seeing around every corner the ruins of slave plantations and the legacy of the inhumane treatment of enslaved persons all over the island. There seems to be no end to these terrible revelations. Next comes a series of hard and complicated questions. What to do? All of our wealth is born from the enduring legacy of slavery. The slave plantation underpinned and fueled the extraordinary expansion of American power and capitalism. And what do we see in society today? The excessive greed and exploitation of people and resources by the rich, and the violence and revenge and hatred of other human beings perpetrated upon people of color. The rich and powerful often act so depraved It echoes the first letter of John Calvin's acronym of his theology. You may remember from class, perhaps, the word TULIP, and that T stood for total depravity. As a pastor from Minnesota said after the ICE atrocities and the murder of the two civilians, evil is encamped all around us. Today, I want to address two issues. First is the telling of truth about our history. Today in America, the truth about history is being suppressed by people who literally want to whitewash our history. I want to tell the truth. I have tried to do this in many ways in my research, telling stories about aspects of our UU heritage that have been untold, forgotten, ignored, even suppressed, because we are uncomfortable with the stories they tell. These include the myths we tell ourselves. These stories include that all the religious liberals during the American Revolution supported the revolution, when in fact many were Tories who believed in an ordered hierarchical society. That all UUs were abolitionists, and even more common recently, that all are anti-racists. And the parts that were suppressed, including my own writing on the popularity of eugenics in our ranks, and earlier the encroachment of spiritualism into Universalist ranks. It is also about telling stories that we have neglected to tell, women's history and African American history. And so I say, let's do something about this assault on the practice of history, and indeed on truth itself. One of those ignored aspects of our history has been the Calvinist roots of Hosea Ballou, who was once the subject, as I said before, of a GA lecture I gave, and more on that in a minute. The second issue I want to address is our UU beliefs about human nature. Here I want to tell a personal story. The three children I had with Andrea all had significant learning issues and ended up going to special schools. Working out support by the town of Watertown for their education was extremely difficult. For you see, towns are notoriously guilty of not spending money on special education. In fact, we learned they will fight tooth and nail to not support your child or their education, claiming they can provide for it within their system. In most cases, it becomes a terrible battle, which involves advocates and eventually lawyers to convince a town that they should support education for all. This had a profound impact on my wife, who, having grown up UU, believed in the inherent goodness of people. That is, that people will do the right thing. We think educators will try to support the family in their desire to see that their child gets an education that responds to the child's needs. The simple faith that people will do the right thing turned out to be erroneous, when the teachers and administrators were duplicitous, mean, and judgmental. My wife's view of human nature as nurtured within UUism was shaken to the core. People were not nice, or even good-intentioned. They liked their power and the maintenance of the system. These two things, I believe, are interrelated: truth and human nature. Let's see what Ballou said about this. And of course, this talk that I gave was a few years back printed in an issue of the UU Christian, which I'm holding up, which was called Universalism Then and Now. In 1805, a relatively obscure preacher named Hosea Ballou produced a treatise on atonement, the greatest theological work in Universalist history. It catapulted him to fame and leadership in the denomination. When Unitarian Universalists have remembered this work and its author, it's been in the context of Ballou's use of reason, the influence of the Enlightenment, and perhaps most important, his Unitarian view of Jesus. We've made him into a Unitarian. But we have missed or given short shrift to a more vital, more timely, and perhaps more enduring legacy of this work. It's modified Calvinism. A treatise on atonement is a reflection of a relatively uneducated gospel preacher who felt his faith more than learned it, and should be read with an understanding of the Calvinist influence on Ballou's faith development. Lingering Calvinism is a crucial but ignored part of our historical legacy as 21st century UUs, which is borne out in several ways. It teaches us that human life, that we humans live in total dependence upon the Creator, or what we might call the creation, and must respond to that creation with a degree of reverence and humility. Second, lingering Calvinism shows that we are all tied together in a community of the whole. All are sinful, all are human beings with faults, and that individual salvation has led us down the path of selfishness and greed. Third, our Calvinist heritage offers a personal view of equality and acceptance. All human beings are sinful, but that makes them all equal in the sight of God. While our UU vision of wholeness is based on individual salvation and a belief in human perfection. I sometimes refer to myself as a Unitarian Calvinist, reflecting that we UUs have often been naive about our understanding of human nature. Human beings, we have said, are good by nature, even able to be morally perfect in all things. William Ellery Channing, for instance, could not condemn the slaveholders for the evil they perpetrated. He said slavery hurt the slaveholders almost as much as the slaves. We have neglected the lessons of history, which echo the cruelty and viciousness of the human spirit that has especially shown its willingness to do anything to achieve power, prestige, and wealth. Whoever earns the most money goes to the best school and ultimately is deemed the most successful are the truly saved. Historian J. Rixey Ruffin, in his biography of William Bentley, Unitarian minister from Salem, writes this: "The Arminian or Proto-Unitarian conviction that God is made happy by material success, if earned by right morality, as every Arminian thought of his or her means, was perhaps the most lasting and influential contribution of New England liberal Christianity to America." Material success, the most lasting and influential contribution. Was setting up slave mortgages right morality? Is the privilege we hold or the ways we exult in that privilege right morality? Can we use our privilege to counter evil? Did I say Calvin? To most Unitarian Universalists today, Calvin represents all that we abhor. We remember Calvin pursuing Michael Servetus, the first Unitarian we claim, and then lashing him to the stake and immolating him and his books on the fire in Geneva. Wasn't it Calvin who gave us total depravity, bondage of the will, and limited atonement? And didn't religious liberals rebel against those beliefs with affirmations of human goodness, free will, and universal salvation? While that rebellion may be an accurate long view of the evolution of our faith, the central impetus behind early Universalism, in sharp contrast to Unitarianism, was based on a Calvinist understanding of the sovereignty of God. The Unitarian and eventually Universalist emphasis on salvation is self-referential. It asks, what can I do about my own salvation? It is about my striving for success on the road to moral perfectionism. Today, it's often about a fulfilling personal journey and identity politics. It is about me. I am among the enlightened. The Universalist perspective, which Hosea Ballou elucidated in his treatise, emphasizes our common relationship to the whole of creation, to a loving God who redeems all. In this vision, we are not distinguishable from one another, nor are we judged as saved or unsaved. Rather than asking about human will, Ballou's vision is centered on discerning God's will for all of creation. How are we bound up together? The goal of life for Calvin was how to conform to God's will and not his own. This was Hosea Ballou's goal, too. We know that Ballou was reared in a strict Calvinist background. His father, a native of Rhode Island, had moved the family to the backwoods of New Hampshire, and Ballou was raised the son of a pious and devout preacher, who would be described as a New Light and a separate Baptist. In January 1789, at the age of 19, Ballou wrote, "I was much troubled in my mind, because I thought I did not stand in such fear of the divine wrath as I ought to do. This trouble led to reading and reflection on the doctrine of eternal misery and resulted in the conclusion later that same year that God's redemption was meant for all. This was about the time that Ballou admitted to his father one day that he was reading a Universalist book. His father then observed the boy hiding the book in the woodpile, and he went to retrieve it that he might destroy it, only to discover that this Universalist book was the Bible. Anne Lee Bressler, the author of the Universalist movement in America, writes that Ballou's early Universalist theology is an effort to improve Calvinism, especially in its heavy emphasis on the sovereignty of God. Central to Ballou was the belief that the true gospel ministry consists in communicating the knowledge of God. This was a God of infinite goodness who could never will anything contrary to his nature, which is love. Humans can also never be separated from God's goodness. There is nothing we do to earn these blessings to any greater or lesser degree. He writes that whatever blessings were intended by these promises, there is not the least intimation that they were promised on any conditionality. The fulfillment of them depends entirely upon the will and power of God. So no events occur apart from God's direction. As he said, we are nothing only as we exist in God. One gains an enormous respect for Ballou's sense of humility before God. When he finished writing the notes on the parables, he said he could not close his remarks without expressing my gratitude to the divine being for continuing me in life and health. Ballou's humble and reverent faith that we live in total dependence upon God or the creation reflects his belief in the unity of the divine nature and how humans must come to embrace the nature of love with our lives. In the treatise, many of Ballou's points are illustrated by homespun observations about life. Perhaps drawing from his life as the youngest of 11 children, he tells the story of the father of 10 children. Suppose, he says, the father has provisions enough for the whole, and his object in the bestowing of it upon them is to cause the greatest possible happiness among his children. Which way would good sense and parental affection choose? Either to feed 5 to the full and starve the rest to death, that their dying groans might give the others a better appetite and their food a good relish, or to let them all be hungry enough to relish their food well, and all alike partake of it. This story reveals a second aspect of his message that is relevant to our living faith today. There is no individual salvation. We are bound up in the community of the whole. The main object in all that we do is happiness. Ballou posits, and knowing that his own happiness is connected with the happiness of his fellow men, which induces him to do justly and to deal mercifully with all men, he is no more selfish than he ought to be. Anne Bressler argues that Ballou rejected the hierarchical social vision of the Arminians, the rich getting richer and being more moral because of their richness. This new vision did not make distinctions between people. One's lot was cast with the rest of the human race. But the human race was not cast out on its own. The entire human family is drawn up into God's love in one moral community. This is a God that created a world that is one organic whole, and other people are essential to our salvation. Ballou wrote, "A man acting for his own happiness, if he seek in a narrow circle of partiality and covetousness, his selfishness is irreligious and wicked." It is not possible in Ballou's theology to win through any sort of competition, only through cooperation that brings all into the circle of creation. His was a classless vision of heaven, without pedigrees or genealogies, and where the goal was connection to others, not personal fulfillment. I neither expect nor desire perfect happiness while I see my fellow man in misery. Virtue is always conceived of in terms of relationship and not in terms of self. Ballou says, the more humble we are, the greater our enjoyments. But when we are completely humbled and perfectly reconciled, I believe all strife concerning who shall be great in the kingdom of heaven will be at an end. Central to Ballou's thought is that the misery of others, no matter who they are, does not secure my personal salvation. In fact, as long as we lack humility before the creation and only grapple selfishly for personal salvation, it is harder to understand God's goodness and plan for us all. Ballou's God is clearly about loving all, not judging some. Sin is intended to achieve God's purpose, which is happiness found in reconciliation with God. Ballou does not deny the existence of sin, and in fact, our selfishness results in our punishment for our sins instantly and inevitably. Because sin is punished here, God's love is not selective in the hereafter, and thus there are no distinctions in heaven. This was especially disturbing to those who believed that people of the finest character were more likely to achieve salvation. A good moral Unitarian did not want to share space in heaven with a prostitute. Ballou believes sin is finite, as it represents the acts of finite beings. God's will and God's purpose come before anything human, and sin exists only to help us achieve God's purpose, which is the happiness we find when we are reconciled to God. Reflecting on the belief that the severity of original sin makes it infinite, Ballou says if this is so, then God and goodness cannot be. Therefore, punishment for sin has to be finite. It has to happen here on earth. There can be no eternal damnation. It is not our individual acts that will save us, nor is it the class we belong to which will reflect our salvation. All that matters is that we connect with that larger moral force which unites the universe. Harmony with the whole is more important than individual excellence. This theology affirms that all of us are good just as we are, and so there is a kind of divine acceptance or grace in each of our very beings. No matter what we do with our lives, no matter what befalls us, there is still a love that embraces us. Ballou wrote, "If God is infinitely good, then all beings whom his power produced are the objects of his goodness." This brings us back full circle to the whole moral existence of humanity in the body of God. Each of us fits into God's scheme of salvation, and thus each person is blessed and has a purpose in this life. Marilyn Robinson, the novelist, tells us that Calvin says that each of us is an actor on a stage and God is the audience. That metaphor, she says, has always interested me because it makes us artists of our behavior, and the reaction of God to us might be thought of as aesthetic rather than morally judgmental in the ordinary sense. How well do we understand our role? With how much assurance do we perform it? I do like Calvin's image, though, she says, because it suggests how God might actually enjoy us. I believe we think about that far too little. It would be a way into understanding essential things, since presumably the world exists for God's enjoyment, not in any simple sense, but as you enjoy the being of a child, even when he is in every way a thorn in your heart. He has a mind of his own, the retired minister and character Boynton says in Gilead, when that son of his was up to something, and he meant it as praise. He really did. In this quotation, there's both an understanding of the human inclination to rebelliousness while acknowledging the joy at the heart of creation. This provides a window to an important correlation between Calvinism and the foundations of Universalism. Elsewhere, Robinson says that for Calvin, no one is more evil than the one who strives for self. Ballou could have said the same thing. Now consider the Arminian theology evolving to salvation by individual success and ponder the difference. Ponder the greed, ponder the violence and cruelty of today. There is a human inclination to power and domination, and we should not be fooled by ignoring the potential for evil in the human heart. But at the same time, We can't let it steal our joy. We can't let it make us mean. Early Universalism, as it was born from its Calvinist roots, affirmed the interconnectedness of humanity rather than the disconnected individualism of competition and the striving for perfectionism that kills the spirit, that kills the joy in living. In 1845, Hosea Ballou had a sermon of his reprinted in a Universalist periodical, reminding us of the novel Gilead. This sermon, entitled The Balm of Gilead, reprises one of Ballou's great themes. The Creator has a design for us, and it is impartial goodness. God enjoys the creation, but is well aware of human failings. Despite our sinful choices, God calls us home to this community of goodness, where we reach out to our neighbors. As Barbara Kingsolver says in the opening words, how can we prove that mean people have not made us mean or cruel? Each of us must sow seeds of kindness to counter the pervasive cruelty. As we build a greater community of the whole, while aware of the evil around us, do we use the power we have to fight for justice, while our strength and our joy for living to respond to the powers who perpetrate evil, while we do everything we can to embrace and make real the goodness of the whole? So may it be. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. People can turn their cameras back on. And Richard and I will work on recognizing folks who'd like to make a comment or observation. And please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom, or simply raise your hand and we'll call upon you accordingly. And I'm going to take advantage, because I have the floor, raising my hand and being recognized. Mark, your conversation ties so closely to what I've been working and studying that really so much of early Universalism was just modified Calvinism. And would you agree that both Murray and Winchester also practice, quote, modified Calvinism? In respect, I'll answer a question about Winchester, who believed in all are saved, but there is restoration that is required. But do you believe they are also founded on modified Calvinism?
I do, certainly very much so with Murray and Winchester as well. Although I think you lose some of this meaning that I was just giving to Ballou if you believe in restorationism. Because restorationism gets into this whole thing where who's better than somebody else. And what's crucial about Ballou and his Calvinism is that nobody's better than anybody else. This is what Calvin said. We're all sinful. And Ballou would have said the same thing. We're all saved, but we're all sinful. And this loving God saves us. So all power is given to God rather than to humans. And this to me is one of the failings of restorationism.
Yeah, so one question, then I'll put it back to folks on the floor. So Ballou has often been referred to as the advocate for ultra-universalism.
Right.
Would you agree to that statement?
Yes.
Okay. And by that, I will make my definition, have Mark correct me, is that there is no interim between life in our mortal sense and our afterlife in the eternal sense, that one goes from life where all pain and suffering and sin is incurred, then to eternal happiness and holiness.
Yes, ultra-universalism was also known as death and glory universalism.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, this is your chance to learn about Hosea Ballou, or Hosea Ballou, and I know you have made comments and studied on Ballou as well, Richard. Any comments from yourself?
Dick?
I love hearing about Hosea Ballou. I identify with him. Anytime I'm near Richmond, New Hampshire, I go up and visit graves of his parents because I know he can't do it anymore.
Yeah, the house he grew up in is still there. Richmond is just north of where I grew up, near Athol and Orange, just over the border.
And there's a stone right at the edge of the road in front of the house that was left there by Universalists in 1803.
Yeah. Oh. His grave is at Mount Auburn Cemetery, and I believe it's the nicest memorial there. I love visiting his grave there.
Yeah, Doug, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Mary Lou and I, some years back, visited the cemetery where Ballou's parents are. And it's overgrown and the stones are very primitive, but we found it. And it's in the woods, kind of, and you really have to go looking for it. But we were a little younger then, and we got ourselves through the woods and into the cemetery. And you have to look around because I say it's pretty primitive, but it's worth a trip if you like to walk out in the woods. That's in Richmond, New Hampshire. And also, I have one other thing. I was just recently able on, I think it was eBay, to buy this book. This is The Life of John Murray by Skinner and Cole. And I've seen it advertised, for many, many dollars over the years, but this one was only about $20 on eBay. And I just finished reading it, actually. And it actually has a autograph of Clarence Skinner in the front.
Nice.
So it's worth reading. It's a very good book. It's easy reading. I learned more about John Murray than I ever knew before. Even though it's almost 100, well, say 80 years old, I guess. Copyright, I think, is 1941. Mm-hmm. But it's a good story if you're able to find the book.
Well, Doug, I don't want to push too far to the head of the line, but in your will, if you could bequeath that book to me, I would be your friend forever.
Okay. Well, I'll take that under consideration.
You're a good man. Donna, you have the floor.
Yeah, I
Mute yourself.
wrote a lot of notes about what I don't know anything about. And, the first one is Calvinism. I really don't know anything. And you mentioned Unitarian Calvinism, but does Universalist Calvinism exist, and how would they be different or the same?
Well, of course, Unitarianism precedes Universalism. When we're talking about Universalism, we're really talking about 1700s and onwards. And Unitarianism is virtually as old as Calvinism, not quite, but almost. And we begin to see it in the 1560s in Transylvania and in Poland. But what's interesting for me about Calvin is that he was accused of being a Unitarian because he put so much emphasis on the sovereignty of God, which is what I was mentioning in this talk, that he forgot about Jesus. And so many of the people in in Geneva said, "Hey, this guy Calvin is a Unitarian." So, but of course he wasn't, and ended up persecuting Servetus and other Unitarians as well. Universalist is a much more complicated story because early Universalists, many of them were Baptists, and they certainly were Calvinists, and probably the Baptists provided this largest number of converts to Universalism. And they came out of this Calvinist tradition. And so that's why Ballou, Caleb Rich, who was Ballou's teacher, and John Murray, and we've mentioned Winchester as well, were among the founders, and all came out of this Calvinist background, which was a theology that we won't get into it, but It's a lot of it has to do with predestination, which I didn't talk about tonight, but it was that people were predestined to be saved or not saved, and that the response to that was universal salvation. And Murray was very much a Calvinist because he believed in predestination. He just believed that everyone was predestined to be saved. And so he just universalized predestination.
And my only other question is, my ears kept hearing Armenianism, and while you were talking, I went to the dictionary behind me and realized you were saying Arminian, and
Yes.
it's not. I'm totally clueless, other than what I just read in the dictionary about the.
Let me give you a quick definition of Arminianism.
Okay.
Not to be confused with Armenians and Armenianism or whatever, who were actually predominant in the town I lived with in Watertown. A quarter of the population were Armenians, which means they come from Armenia, near Russia. Anyways, Arminianism takes its name from a theologian named Jacob Arminius, who was Dutch. And his theology was condemned at the Synod of Dort in 1619, where that synod affirmed Calvinism and the 5 points of Calvinism that I referred to in the talk, the first one being total gravity. Arminianism, basically, a simple definition is that you play a role in your own salvation, that God offers salvation to you, and that you play a role in accepting that salvation. So it has to do with the human will and human abilities. Whereas Calvinism, strictly speaking, there are no human abilities. Salvation has to do with God. It's all in God's hands.
Thank you.
So it's about individual moral striving.
Well, Mark, I'm going to thank you again for bringing up the root of universalism, even Unitarianism, because we all came, at least into the American side of this, out of Calvinist churches, whether it be the Baptist, the Congregationalist churches, even Murray, when he was still in England, all came out of Calvinist-based churches where you said the depravity of all humankind, limited atonement, the pre-selection of God to those who are saved and those who are condemned. And to me, that always had such a darkness to it. And I just recently wrote a short biography on Ballou from Thomas Whittemore's autobiography. And Whittemore talks about a time when Ballou's father looked at his many children, I think 11 children it was, and he wondered which one of them were saved. And every time I read that chapter, I just pause with the sense of dread that a parent has, looking that they have no control over this, that some of their children God will save and some will be condemned. And I think, Richard, you once said, and tell me if I put you incorrectly, many Calvinists pray dearly to try to convince themselves they are indeed saved. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a chapter of our denomination, which is the scholarship, or at least the general understanding, is so shallow that it really needs to be brought forward.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I was saying, it's one of these stories, we sort of have made Ballou into a Unitarian, and we've forgotten this Calvinist background, or we've emphasized those parts that have nothing to do with the sovereignty of God, but have to do with human abilities and human striving. Sure. And so we've forgotten humility. We've forgotten, the sort of the weakness of human nature, all those things. And it's been to our detriment sometimes. And I use Channing as an example in my talk. Channing was unable to condemn the slaveholders just because, people were too good. And part of the problem is the Brahmins in Boston, who made up the majority of the faith, all lived very privileged, easy lives. And the distinction with Universalists is they didn't live those privileged, easy lives like the Unitarians did.
John, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm curious, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, this Armenian, however you say that, Armenianism, how does that work with the Campus Crusade for Christ, where you accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? That action is required, so you are participating. So would that be a form of the Armenianism that you refer to?
Yeah, I think, if you're talking about theology today, you're primarily talking about most Christians being Armenian. They believe that everyone who's a Christian believes if they want to be saved, they will be saved. I think there's no more about God playing a role anymore. So at least that's the way I see it.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Well, we'll give this just a few minutes. We have about 10 more minutes before our time expires. So I want to ask everyone who is interested, we will post the video of this session up on the Universalist Convocation website. If you go visit the registration for the convocation, you'll see there'll be a link underneath of this session to view that video and all our other videos from our other sessions as well. And we have completed our scheduling, our program for our in-person convocation in Newberry, South Carolina, which I'm hoping many can attend. It will be our last attempt. And Mark, I'm going to make one last pitch for my interest in Southern Universalism, which really derives not out of Calvinism, but out of the German Baptist Brethren pious teaching in South Carolina, which holds to it a different avenue once again of this notion of those who can or will be saved through their lives, their pious life, more Arminian than Calvinist in that particular point of view. But that's enough for me. So I'll ask again, any other questions, observations, thanks to be offered to our speaker?
I have a quick question. This is putting people on the spot. They may not want to respond to this. Part of the struggle I'm having personally is with this fund that I'm the administrator for, where I've recently learned that all of our money originates with these slave mortgages. Now, what would you do if you were in my position with this knowledge? Any thoughts on that?
Well, slavery.
We were talking a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
It's not nickel and dime.
Slavery was worldwide. And the British Empire, of which we were a part until the Revolution, was the first world empire, I believe, to eliminate slavery. And we had to struggle, of course, because of the economic interests of the South, but the Statue of Liberty was given to us because we had eliminated slavery. If you look at her feet, she's walking out of shackles. And this business about Statue of Liberty being about immigration is just an accident of Emma Lazarus' poem being slapped on and the delay in the construction of the statue. I don't think we need to let the past control the present like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, I have a similar problem as I study Southern Universalists. They were farmers and slaveholders. And I try very hard not to put my 21st century sensibilities upon them. But I'm always perplexed how they could buy a family of slaves in the morning and then attend church in the afternoon. But I'm somewhere with Richard on this. is how much of the original sin gets passed down? That's an imperfect answer.
Jesus accepted slavery as a fact of life. It was just a universal phenomenon in his world. He never said word one against it.
Yeah, and again, at the time when slavery, it was just, at least I know when I read in the newspapers at the time, it was just so evident that it was part of life. Runaway slave, $500. Here's a new potbelly stove you can buy. There's no recognition of it.
There were ads for slave auctions in the Universalist Herald.
But I think, Mark, you bring forward our earlier or now more current, what is our relationship to evil deeds done before, of which we have benefit?
Well, it's all the money.
Yeah.
All the money is built on the backs of slave mortgages. So what do? Do we give reparations to their descendants? Do we establish memorials? Do we learn the history? There's all these aspects of it.
No.
Yeah, I'm going to let Craig have the floor since he has his hand raised.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know I quickly went to the Universalist Book of Reference, the 1853 edition, my only rare book, and I sent you a scan of a page that shows the Universalists breaking out what they feel are the salient differences between Calvinism, Arminianism, and Universalism. I can't recommend the 1853 edition of the Universalist Book of Reference more highly. That's all. And thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah. One of the problems with 1853 is that Ballou has died the year before, and his brand of ultra-universalism is on the decline, and restorationism is on the ascent. And restorationism becomes the predominant view of the Universalists, not ultra-universalism. So obviously a lot of my talk is based in ultra-universalism.
Thank you, Craig. How do I pronounce your name?
Wakoya.
Wakoa? Wakoe?
Wakoya.
Wakoya. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I very much appreciated the message, and it's inspired me to go and look up again at Hosea Ballou. And in terms of slavery, I want to bring forward that we continue to have slavery. Much of the slavery we have now is related to gender oppression. However, we still have slavery in terms of people who work very, very many hours for very limited pay, pay that does not allow them to earn a living wage. And some of those people are also clergy. So I feel as though the fund being used to offset people who spend very much of their life in labor that is uncompensated properly, which is another definition of slavery, is a fitting use of that money. And another fitting use might be to look at current slavery and support those individuals who might be doing work in sex trafficking or other places that are affected by modern slavery. Domestic violence and abuse is also a form of modern slavery, and something that I personally have in my life story. So I have connections to the various ways that we can understand evil and human exploitation, and certainly we can continue to do the work that addresses the modern expressions of oppression and inequality in all the different ways that we attend to it.
Thanks so much. That's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm going to begin closing out our session here again by thanking Mark so much. Excellent conversation, excellent scholarship, and I think this needs to be more available within our contemporary world. And I think you have hopefully some fine examples and ideas of what to do with the money to put it to the best good despite its dark roots. So I'm going to thank everyone.
Oh, I have one quick comment.
Sure thing.
I mentioned earlier how that talk on Ballou was in the UU Christian from years gone by. It's also available on the website of the UU Studies Network. You have to do a little searching for it. But if you want to see the original text, tonight's talk had some of the original lecture in it, but also a lot of sermonic material and other material that I've added that's new. But if you want to see the original lecture, that's where you can find it. UU Studies Network.
Thank you, Mark.
Is there a way to reach you if for follow-up questions?
Sure. Why don't you, I don't know if you have my email or not, but Jay can provide my email.
We can get an
You want to
email.
email Jay if you have questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Email me just to make sure this closes the loop. And it's jaykiskel@bellsouth.net. jaykiskel@bellsouth.net, and I'll forward you Mark's email address. Okay. I'm going to ask the members of the Universalist Convocation Planning Committee to stay online for another 10 minutes. But I'm going to thank everyone for attending this evening. And please also join us for our Easter April Vespers as well, first Wednesday of the month. Thank you again for attending. And Richard, you may now end the recording.